record on this computer. Och ska vi se här så att vi har rätt nummer här ett ögonblick. Hello and most welcome to 16. That must be 1680. And we will continue with the review made by Gonzalo Munevar, Conquering Feyerabend's Conquest of Abundance. And we made an extensive discussion last on Brunelleschi and the change in our visual world. And that was a rather massive change. From that time onwards, we became dwellers of the central perspective or the linear perspective. Brunelleschi still had the box, the camera oscura, so he knew that it needed an instrument to do its trick. But the later artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Tizian, and others, Tintoretto, they directly, in a natural manner, as they call it, constructed realism from an ingenious, of course, very hard to do, sort of understanding of what the box did. And my bet is on that those famed painters of the Renaissance still know that there was a box so to say in the equation, but it disappeared. And after that, most painters and all people changed their view on how reality was working. It became the linear perspective as a default view of the reality. So no longer could we appreciate beautiful paintings like the Madonna in Pisa with the big eyes, or horrible eyes, as they also said. There's no exaggeration to say that 800 or 700 years of art all of a sudden became horrible, ugly, unsightful. You had to go back to the early antiquity to have something understandable. Byzantine art, medieval art, all disappeared, and we got this highly artificial. And this is no criticism. Yes, that is an important, if you can underline that, the second line under the black thing. And I read that out loud. The difference between Brunelleschi and tradition is that while Brunelleschi controlled the set, traditional artists are largely controlled by it. We are all controlled by this. There's no exceptions. This is definitely comparable to the difference between classical physics, where the box is no longer present. So we don't have a measuring instrument in the equation. We just have reality directly. Or a reality out there, if you prefer. And that gives the other consequence, a perspective from nowhere. You don't know where the black box is, so you are sort of floating around in this reality, or you get dissolved by it. When quantum mechanics came, and this is what we're going to discuss today, once more the camera oscura came into the equation, or to reality. You can call it the subject also. If you have one type of instrument, you will get a particle. If you have an oscilloscope or something similar, you will get a wave. You can only get objectivity if you have the subject, aka the measuring device chosen by the subject, the instrument, and the result. For us now in 2023, that seems pretty obvious, but until recently it was not. Somehow it would have been enough with just reality and nothing else. And that is also the case when it comes to all strands of academia today. Looking for the original without thinking that there's a subject and a measuring device. A translator, an inscriber, a typologist, a copyist, a reader, which is also forgotten. How can you have a text without taking who is reading into the consideration? The skill of the reader, age, background. I think it's just horrible to ignore that. It's blasphemous, it's nasty. This is this monosemic that we have been uncovering more and more. Impossible to criticize because it's founded in what we call knowledge today. But you can reveal it. And I will continue my read here, and it is currently on the second paragraph of page 8. And this is a continuation of 1675. The suggestion is that the notion of stage sets is also useful for thinking about the relationship between science and reality. At the complex end of science, we have, for example, the CERN experiment that led to the discovery of the W and Z particles in 1981. Proton-antiproton collisions, detectors to catch the short-lived particles, computers to select candidate events, sorry for the breakdown. Now we continue here where we left off. We have started a little earlier. The CERN experiment that led to the discovery of the W and Z particles in 1981. Proton-antiproton collisions. Detectors to catch the short-lived particles. Computers to select candidate events and display them so as to compare them with predictions from electroweak theory. And so on. According to Feyerabend, neither nature nor its theoretical image were faced directly. They were both transformed by complex and sophisticated processes. Here the stage was constructed with great effort and ingenuity, and the projections involved are clearly the result of long and difficult training. But we may find their equivalents even at the more Baconian end of science, in which scientists, finding coherence in their projections, combine them into a world and then disregarding the projecting mechanisms, which by now have become second nature, they assert the objective existence of this world. The best cure for this naive realist compulsion, both in art and science, is to have alternative ways of creating order gain the upper hand. In art, we come to realize that medieval painting, for example, had goals other than imitation. Its purpose was rather to portray power, authority, permanence, instead of individuality. In portraits, artists aim to convey the dignity of the office, not the personal characteristics of the office holder. The existence of mechanisms of projection becomes quite evident also when we consider our interpretation of, say, the sorts of drawings popular in anatomical and other scientific treatises from the 17th century on. As well as in 20th century art. We have all seen the illustrations from Descartes' L'Homme. A human figure is drawn with one eye on top of another on the right side of the face, with lines projecting out of the eyes to several points on a wall in front of the figure. There's nothing like that in the world, but we read it to represent how vision works. Lines of sight, angles, nerve projections inside the head to the pineal gland, the nerves that go out to muscles inside the arm, which without the appropriate projecting mechanism, we might see as tattoos on the arm. as far as science is concerned, the point is made by realizing that science is not one thing but many. In content, methods, and attitudes about experiments and experience. Scientists like Luria and Delbruck showed little patience for subjects loaded with weak inferences, such as the big problems of the universe or the early Earth. Einstein, Newton, and Poincaré exhibited the opposite inclination. Feyerabend quotes Einstein's famous remark, "Is it not really strange that human beings are deaf to the strongest arguments, while they are always inclined to overestimate measuring accuracies?" Such overestimation Such overestimation, however, is the rule in epidemiology, demography, genetics, spectroscopy, and other subjects. Moreover, the existence of different trends within a comprehensive venture is not surprising. It would be strange if large groups of passionate and imaginative people who despise authority and makes criticism a guide to research, subscribe to a single point of view. In the 19th century, the astronomical view rested on action at a distance laws. The atomic view was accepted in some areas of chemistry and rejected in others. The kinetic and mechanical view received atomism well. The phenomenological view did not. The situation was not very different in the 20th century, in spite of some unifications achieved by statistical thermodynamics, molecular biology, and quantum chemistry. We need not restrict us We need not restrict ourselves to the physical sciences. Behaviorism pointed to successes that seemed inaccessible to other procedures. Like Brunelleschi, behaviors set up a stage, experimental equipment, etc. Project their subjects, call the projected aspects facts, and listen now, identify them with a stage-independent reality. And here we, of course, have Köhler, Hoover, and all the other, Bernard, someone Lee. Nevertheless, the very presence of a stage and of methods of projection throw doubts on the identification. Think of the very different projections made by ethology and of its even greater successes. And think also of later approaches, such as neuropsychology, which makes its object of study what for behaviorists was a black box. At one time, behaviorists were confident of giving an objective account of human affairs, but alternative ways of creating order gained the upper hand. In summary, science offers not one story, it offers many. The stories clash, and their relation to a story-independent reality is problematic. Incommensurability and relativism. In Conquest, Feyerabend does not discuss his own version of incommensurability. That is, the use of the concepts of a theory or worldview precludes the use of the concepts of another theory or worldview. Thus, presenting Einsteinian facts means suspending principles assumed in the construction of Newtonian facts. Nor does he discuss the original and sensible notion of incommensurability soon after hijacked by the concerns of linguistic philosophy. He concentrates instead on a popular account of Kuhn's version. Some have asserted that the transition from a comprehensive physical theory to its historical successor involves an act of conversion, and that the converted no longer understand the older faith. Against this account, he recalls that a transition from classical physics to quantum physics was one of the most radical transformations in the history of science, and yet every stage of the transformation was discussed. In the dramatic clash between Bohr and Einstein, he asks, did they talk past each other? No, Einstein raised an objection. Bohr was mortified, thought intensely, found an answer, told Einstein, and Einstein accepted the answer. Einstein raised another objection. Bohr was again mortified. When we look at the details, we realize that the conversion philosophy simply does not make sense. Earlier in Conquest, Feyerabend had taken issue with the champions of incommensurability, for they assume that languages and worldviews are closed in the sense that they admit, even constitute some actions, thoughts, perceptions, while others are not merely excluded, but rendered non-existent. This sounds like an attack on his own view, unless we keep in mind a qualification he has often stated. Incommensurability is a difficulty for philosophers, not for scientists. Philosophers insist on stability of meaning throughout an experiment, while scientists, being aware that speaking a language or explaining a situation means following rules and changing them, are experts in the art of arguing across lines, which philosophers regard as inseparable boundaries of discourse. We go to the next page, please. Of course, if discourse is defined as a sequence of clear and distinct propositions which are constructed according to precise and merciless rules, it will be often interrupted by irrational events and soon replaced by a new discourse. Furthermore, for this new discourse, its predecessors is nonsense, pure and simple. If, on the other hand, worldviews and cultures are allowed some leeway so that they either keep their identity through very drastic changes or change their content without violating their worldview, then we have no reason to assume that our ways of conveying meaning have any limits. This is not to deny differences between languages or cultures, but to ascribe them to accidents of location or history, not to clear unambiguous cultural essences. Potentially, every culture is all cultures. We have seen in section 3 why Feyerabend thinks that meanings are indeed flexible. And it is from that flexibility and his thoughts on incommensurability that he draws the conclusion that relativism is unacceptable. When speaking of stages, projections, aspects, Feyerabend has made things more definite than they are. Different traditions may have had their own ideas about the function of art, for example, and perhaps different stages, etc. But we go too far when we begin thinking in terms of systems and inferring a general relativity of artistic efforts. This would be as sensible as trying to define the shape of a body of water by the shape it assumes when frozen, and inferring a radical difference between water, ice, and steam. Relativism assumes that traditions are not only equally truthful messengers of reality, but that they are well defined and clearly separated. If this second assumption fails, then relativism will cease to be acceptable. This failure will also do in realism. But this matter has already been discussed. In any event, the discovery that every culture is potentially all cultures clashes with the assumption and brings it into question. Now, some traditions may be quite rigid, but most groups, societies, traditions not only interact, they are built for interaction. Moreover, the pressure brought about by those interactions can transform their systems of projection in a fundamental way. Not being well defined is part of their nature, and thus the ambiguities they contain. When becoming manifest, dissolve all relativistic judgment. He states his new position strongly. Relativizing existence to a single conceptual system that is then closed off from the rest and presented in unambiguous detail mutilates real traditions and creates a chimera. I believe that Feyerabend's account on this matter is mistaken. It may work against some forms of relativism, but surely not against all. In the first place, and against a caricature of the last 2,300 years, a view counts as relativistic if it denies that there exists one single truth or reality, that is absolute truth. It need not claim that all points of view are equally valid. Only that there may be more than one valid point of view. Second, relativism need not relativize with respect to a theory, a tradition, or a culture, although it may. A relativization with respect to the cognitive potential of a species genome may be sufficient to show that there is no single truth or reality. Third, a biologically based relativism will be unavoidable, be flexible and open to change. Being guided, after all, by the conceptual machinery of evolutionary theory. In the evolutionary account, the conceptual limit may well be a horizon that recedes. For the exploitation of the resources of the genotype demands on the environment or environments involved in the interaction. The environment is not static, However, it may simply change, in which cases the phenotypes that may have been adequate before may be challenged successfully by a new approach, more in consonance with the new circumstances. The relevant environment may also change as the result of the interaction with the first successful phenotype. That is, the environment may be transformed. In this, I take culture in general and science in particular to be human phenotypic expressions. There are incidentally additional circumstances within which this evolutionary relativism accommodates change. It may also happen that success in one environment leads to the organisms in question to venture into other environments. Which jointly offer challenges of a different sort. Also, the influx of new ideas, as well as the articulation of the main points of view, change the conditions of interaction with the universe. And that change of conditions opens the door to a different approach. Six, ethics as a measure of scientific truth. To many intellectuals, says Feyerabend, the universality of a principle means that it corresponds to a universal features of an observer and history-independent world. But he argues such a correspondence is not obvious. According to him, the evidence tells us only that we get quarks, leptons, and space-time frames when we approach the world. Very important. It's only then. Or being with certain concepts, instruments, and interpretations which are often highly accidental outcome of complex, idiosyncratic, and rather opaque historical developments. What the evidence leaves open, he says, is whether the response is the way in which being reacted to the approach, or if it belongs to being independently of any approach. The first option is consistent with quantum theory, which suggests that the familiar spatiotemporal properties of elementary particles, and this is important, are not inherent in them, but emerge as a result of special interactions. Yet scientific realists prefer the second options. In this, they reflect a preference for forms of coherence that can be managed without much effort. What agrees with their preference is called real. All else is illusion. According to Feyerabend, this notion of reality also contains a normative component. Behavior should center around what is real and must avoid being influenced by illusions. I think the word illusions there could be our time for summary and looking at quotes. I don't think we have to go back so much. The suggestion, I see we have one here. We're nice to have Descartes' l'homme. We are speaking now on page 8, the second paragraph. Maybe you can, Callie can take Descartes' l'homme up on Google, see that photo or picture. I'll spell it for you. L'homme, yes. L, yeah, Descartes, l'homme, French l'homme. L, and there you have a little point, an accent, and H. Omnis. No, plural. You have the second one there, you have it. Ah, no, it wasn't. Now we have it. So you get sight from certain measuring devices. They are in on it. So the ABC there is not all of reality. The measuring devices of the eyes, the pineal gland, the visual nerve, the muscular activity, all are in on it. They are, so to speak, the black box of Brunelleschi. This is the point of Feyerabend Munevar. And the top of paragraph 4 on the same page, this is important and often repeated argument in Conquest of Abundance. As far as science is concerned, the point is made by realizing that science is not one thing but many. Which are the most common incommensurable parts of science? Well, in classical physics, we have thermodynamics, hydrodynamics, magnetic theory, and so on. They are all different and they don't fit into each other. But as we later will see, that doesn't mean that they are absolutely incommensurable. They can speak to each other still. Speaking to each other doesn't mean that you have to have the same world. Not at all. I would say that is even problematic, because it doesn't even mean anything the same world. It is an illusion. It's a mistake. I would say it's even a delusion. So we forget the measuring device, we forget the human hand, the eye, the calculation, whatever is in the subject is forgotten today. and we just see true, clear reality, so to speak. And that is another example on top of page 9 from all line 8 there. Behaviorism pointed to successes that seem inaccessible to other procedures. And listen now, like Brunelleschi, behaviorists set up stage experimental equipment to the right people, the order to go about, a schedule, project the subjects, call the projected aspects facts, and identify them with a stage-independent reality. So it's not problematic in the beginning, it's when you present it as just out there without the instruments, how you got to it. And of course, this is an absurdity that Feyerabend is pointing to. And it leads to dreadful things. As we can see in the next paragraph 5, relativism. The current mode of complete incommensurability leads to relativism. All views hold true. And that is the same thing exactly as absolutism. There's no difference in take for Feyerabend or for quantum mechanics. And there's a very good argument, 267, from 10 lines down. Against this account, he recalls that the transition from classical physics to quantum physics was one of the most radical transformations in the history of science. And yet, every stage of the transformation was discussed. You can read the book by Bodanis, Einstein's Mistake, to get some of those discussions. All the clashes between Bohr and Einstein meant that they were communicating. They know exactly what they disagreed on. According to Kuhnian and popular incommensurability, they wouldn't even be able to speak to each other. And a few lines down, you can see Feyerabend had taken issue with the champions of incommensurability. Thomas Kuhn was actually his inspirer for a short while. They had a relation, some sort. I think he was his teacher. But he rejected the Kuhnian view later on. And we see these unseparable boundaries of discourse, the last sentence of what we have here. Last sentence. Yeah, there. Inseparable boundaries of discourse. And that is relativism. Page 10. Thank you. Page 10, second paragraph at the end. I will cut this a little bit short, but there are two assumptions. And relativism can only hold at the first assumption: all traditions are equally truthful messengers of reality. But they are well defined. Page 114 on the book, bit up. So all, so to speak, yeah. I like this would be as sensible as trying to define the shape of a body of water by the shape it assumes when frozen, inferring a radical difference between water, ice, and steam. And relativism does actually, and this is the odd thing, although how relative it sounds, it does most definitely, more than any other ideology, takes the idea of an observer from nowhere, where you can see that all traditions and all strands of science are well defined and clearly separated. Another quote there, a couple of lines down. So absolutism and relativism are exactly the same thing. They assume a point from nowhere, and relativism hides it. And we have a quote from page 143, a bit down, like 10 lines down. Relativizing existence to a single conceptual system that is closed off from the rest and presented in an unambiguous detail mutilates real traditions and creates a chimera. Well, everybody believes in relativism or absolutism, which is exactly the same thing. And the second is it's a chimera. It's a deep mistake. It stands on false grounds, or at least incredibly unstable grounds. Munevar seemed to be thinking that Feyerabend on this specific account is mistaken. I don't agree, but Munevar still writes a very good review of the book. It's, I would say, it's incredible strong argument against absolutism / relativism. It's more than an argument, it shows how it works, and its working matter of being absolutely mistaken in the sense of thinking thought. So mistaken that they can't even be proved wrong in an empirical manner. Another quote, not even wrong, just boring. Feyerabend says one instance. And in paragraph 6, on page 245, according to him, the evidence tells us only that we get quarks, leptons, instruments, leptons and space-time frames when we approach the world or being with certain concepts, complex, idiosyncratic, and rather opaque historical developments. What the evidence leaves open is whether the response is the way in which being reacted to the approach, or if it belongs to being independently of any approach. The last one is absolutism, relativism. The first one is the real McCoy, the workings of quantum mechanics. Then, as we mentioned before, you have contradictions, you have polysemia, you have all that, which is truth, and the other one, not even false. Maybe some comments from Kalle here.
Yes, let's go to page 4. No, page 8. Page 8. Is the voice clear? The microphone clear? So, this question by Einstein. Is it not really strange that human beings are deaf to the strongest arguments, while they are always inclined to overestimate measuring accuracies? Einstein himself is not coherent. He didn't live according to his own observation, because he believed in he didn't believe really in an independent reality. He wanted to have the he didn't believe really in an observable independent reality.
Yeah, I noticed that, but here everybody gives up a good quote once in a while.
And what is objectivity today is like a meter can be an objective thing. Most people think this is objective thing, this is the truth, but we know that real for instance, length is based on the human body. So that is the more accurate. And we could say, in order to restore the true length or true, since we are speaking about the measured accuracies, we should return to measure, as they do in America, counting with inches. The body should be the measurement. And it shows how subjective the world is, how subjective the measuring devices are.
Yes.
So let me go now to so we could mention like accidents. We had this here. So how can we illustrate relativism? We can compare it with a grid. It's like relativism is like structuralism that was popular in the 1960s. It was discussed by Peter Salmon. He made a good explanation in his biography of Derrida. I don't know if this is the right chapter. No, it's not the right chapter. I don't know, perhaps it is. Yes, this is actually, do you remember the book by Salmon? He made a very good explanation. I recommend it to everybody. We went through, the construction was born in 1966. And we read through this book Salmon to celebrate your birthday. This was
Yes,
also
yes, I remember.
and he gave a very good explanation of structuralism, and he Salmon compared it to greed. Greed that you place. Let me see. Yes, I think this is very good. You can see it on page 107 in book, in Peter Salmon's book, For Global Levi-Strauss Anthropology, the study of human behavior and societies was also announced the concept of grids of matters of meaning. So greed, sorry, let me read the article. So you can, if you place a grid somewhere, you get, what do you get? Or you can also think about a chess board. Let me see. Another keyword to understand this is clearly defined. Let me see. Let me see. Yes, I think this could work. Here, relativism wants clearly separate things. So like can say on a grid, or if you use a grid or a chessboard, everything is clearly separated because all this, when you have to move one grid on a chessboard, what do you call them in English? When you make a move from one, I could actually show a chessboard. How do you call them, Hans?
Again, what did you say? Try to speak more into the microphone.
Chessboard, like what do you call them?
What do you wonder about the chessboard?
No, I compare the grid. You understand the concept of grid. It's like a chessboard.
Yeah,
We can compare structuralism with, let's say, a chess game.
yeah.
So you see that, let's say we have Sweden here, we have Finland here, we have here Norway. So they are clearly separated.
Yes.
Because you cannot move freely, otherwise you're breaking the rules. You have to respect they are separated. So they're clearly defined. And this is like this is also the framework of structuralism. But they also paradoxically enough to think that everything is all truths are relative because one truth is here and one truth is here.
Yes. Yeah, and it's a very good illustration, but it takes it's sort of imagine that the chessboard you have there is the world, and where is the relativist situated when he can say that all the different traditions, cultures, ideologies, and sciences are equal? He must be outside of the chessboard. He must be having a view from above. So he's like sort of a god without accepting that he's God or acknowledging that.
So we could say that when Feyerabend does not accept relativism, he says not accepting the, what do you call them, chessboard view of reality, so that this would be the reality. So you cut off the players in some way, and you say what is true here is also true there, but they're still clearly defined.
They are interacting. They are not completely in the Kuhnian way incommensurable, but they are constantly interacting despite the fact that they have different rules.
And I think it's, I want to show one last thing from when you mentioned income. Let me see. I think this is very important. Scientists assume they accept incommensurability more easily because they know that everything is relative, because you have to measure everything changes with each measurement. So, do you agree, Hans, that all science, but also philosophy, should be accepting incommensurability, or what would you say?
Well, there is, of course, there's some things like in that direction of incommensurability, but it's not at all working the way that Thomas Kuhn or the general population has it, because as just the most different sciences ever constructed or ever being in existence, classical physics and quantum mechanics, Einstein, Bohr had no problem communicating, and those were the two most different. And I think that's a very strong sort of wake-up call for absolutism, which relativism is, because it takes this panopticon idea somewhere without admitting it.
Hans, I think that the best illustration of this problem is perhaps from Karl Rovelli. He says that everything is, so to say, relative in the sense that everything is about he takes the relation relatives to mean in a new way about relationships. Everything is about relationships. So as on a chessboard, everything is about relationships. It was about relationship between this and this. And like in real life, there are no clear boundaries. Let's say between Sweden and Norway. Okay, you have a front line, but even the borderline between Sweden and Norway is never clearly defined. It can change 1 centimeter here, another centimeter there. So there are. So Karl Norway is, I think, relative, what do you call it, relationalism is the best. But Karl Norway also points out that you need a third person to make the measurements. So in order to say that, so okay, you have these two. Are they? So if one neutron is green, say, or one electron is green, so one outside observer is also check if the other electron is green. So you need always a third person. He says that quantum physics or quantum physics is a dance for not for two but for three.
Yeah.
So the third person is the outside observer who has to check how these two are related.
Yeah, I agree. You can compare the third person to the instrument or something similar. Very good.
Perhaps we should end there, Hans.
Yeah, thank you very much for participating, for your time. Thank you everyone for listening. And now we end 1680. Thank you very much.